Should the man really love a woman more in a relationship? Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I want to talk about the very commonly used phrase or cliche that a man should always love a woman more than a woman loves him in a relationship. It's a very controversial thing that gets thrown around a lot. I know it upsets a lot of people, particularly men, and I really want to break down that idea because while I do think there is some truth in it, I think it gets thrown around without a full understanding for what it actually means. So right off the bat, I'm a firm believer that the healthiest relationships are those where both people think that they're the lucky one. Like both people think that like they're the one that's won in the relationship, because in that situation, that means that they both appreciate the gifts that the other person brings to the relationship. Unfortunately, in society today, masculine gifts or things that men traditionally bring to a relationship are much more tangible. They're easier to calculate. Money or purchasing a home or, really anything that is financial, like those means protection. Those things are very tangible things because we live in a very masculine society. But the things that the feminine brings to a relationship tend to be less tangible. They tend to be more energetic. It's hard to calculate when a woman brings her inspiration, when she brings her energy to a man and then he starts making more money or he starts becoming more successful. It's often seen as his success. It's often seen as like his work that's making it better. And because as the feminine, if she's not physically bringing something that is easily tangible like money to a relationship, she's seen as not bringing as much. If you understand the dynamics of masculine and feminine energies, you understand that that's just not true. The feminine brings so much to the masculine. It's just in our society, what the feminine brings is not necessarily seen as having as much value because we tend to see value as monetary, as what earns money, and that tends to become the thing that we see in our society as having value. And I have a video talking about feminine energy and feminism that dives into a little bit of that more. So I'm not going to dive into that too much, but that's just kind of the basics, is that we calculate what the masculine brings to a relationship as something that's tangible, but because what the feminine brings to a relationship, which I think is where you get the phrase that men throw out, like, what does she bring to the table? Because in our society, if you have men saying, I can bring this, this, and this to the table, he can actually show you what he can bring to the table, whereas the feminine is actually the table. She gets stuff brought to her, right? Like we are the ones who receive, we're the ones who are receptive, but we also inspire, we bring energetics, we bring so much to a relationship. So that's just the basis of things, right? And if you're new to my content, I probably should have explained this at first. Masculine, feminine dynamics, masculine and feminine energies or energies live within all of us. We all contain both energies, but we all have a core energy. That's the one we're most ourselves in. For most men, that will be masculine. For most women, that will be feminine. There are some exceptions, but generally speaking, most men are going to be their best selves when they are in their masculine energy, and most women are going to be their best selves when they're in their feminine energy. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine. And ideally in a healthy version of the masculine and the feminine. I'm not going to dive too much into wounding in this video. I have other videos talking about masculine and feminine wounding. But like ideally, you want a masculine core being and a feminine core being to come together in relationship, and that's where you're going to have sexual polarity. Now the masculine is giving, it's providing. It is penetrating, it's presence, it's consciousness. The feminine is openness, receptivity, creativity, sensuality. Those things are innately feminine. However, we value things that are more masculine in our society. And I'm just covering the basics here. I'm not going to dive into that too much in this video. And when we say things like relationships are better when the man loves a woman more than a woman loves a man, a lot of things can come up for men that they're never fully going to be loved. And I think a lot of things come up for women that as women, we have to be afraid to not love too much. And that's why I think that that statement can sometimes be damaging, because it can set women up for thinking, well, I have to end up with somebody who I don't fully love and I can't fully open up to love, because if I love him more than he loves me, the relationship is doomed to fail. And I think it also sets men up for feeling like, okay, well, no one's ever gonna love me, right? because he has to love more than the woman loves, and he's going to feel like he's never going to get any love in return. So while I do think that there's some truth to that statement that I'm going to get into, that statement alone I feel like sets up a lot of people for potential failure in a relationship, because as women we often see that as a reason to settle, as a reason to be with somebody who we don't truly connect with, who we don't truly feel something for. For a woman to connect to her feminine, she needs to feel safe to open. She needs to feel safe to open to him. And if a woman is feeling like, oh my God, I can't fully open to him because if I fully open to love with this man, he won't love me anymore, or he'll leave me because I'll love him too much. As a woman, you're never going to be able to fully open, right? So it's going to be endlessly disappointing. For the masculine, if you feel like, well, I always have to love her more than she loves me, you're inevitably going to feel like you're never loving enough. Like it's never enough. It's going to become this endless, like, okay, I have to love her more. And it can end up becoming a competition, right? It's not necessarily a healthy state to be in. I would pose a slightly different way of looking at it. And that is the feminine loving the masculine is going to look different than the masculine loving the feminine. It is not the same thing. It's not going to look the same, right? Because the masculine and the feminine, men and women, are different. So we give and receive love differently. This isn't necessarily about love languages. I have a video where I talk a little bit more about love languages. That's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about masculine and feminine dynamics, which are different than what we think of as love languages. Now, the basis of masculine and feminine dynamics is we want a person to be thriving in their natural core energy. That's the goal. That's the ultimate goal. The masculine thrives in challenge. The feminine thrives in safety, which means that for the masculine to fully be his true optimal self, for him to thrive, he needs to be facing challenges. And for the feminine to fully thrive, she needs to be fully safe. She needs to be in a safe space, in a safe container. And I don't mean container in the sense of like being controlled or being limited. Like a relationship is a container, right? Like you are in this relationship with two people, and not to say that that's a closed off thing, but that is your sphere. Like you're in a container. Your home may be your container, right? It's not necessarily meant to be suffocating. And that's also oftentimes too, if you are in a container that is constricting, that can be a problem, right? So I'm not talking about that. When I say container, I'm not talking about something that is controlling. I'm talking about something that is a structure of something, like a relationship. The feminine needs to feel safe in her container, whatever that is, safe in her home, safe in her relationship, in order to fully open. The masculine needs to be challenged. He needs a challenge. He needs to be achieving something. But oftentimes, and this is common in communication, I actually have a whole masterclass about feminine communication if you want to learn more about masculine and feminine communication. But a very common dynamic that happens in, say, communication is that women often communicate to men the way that women want to be communicated with, or the way they communicate to other women. And men often communicate to women in the same way that they want to be communicated themselves, or that they communicate with other men. And that's oftentimes where communication breaks down, and that's not what this video is about. I have a whole masterclass about that. So if you want to learn more about that, it's in the description box below. But I would say that love and expressing love works a similar way. I think this is oftentimes why men will sometimes get into this idea of constantly trying to test a woman, which is actually more of a feminine thing to do. And very, very wounded feminine men will do that. They'll be constantly testing a woman. But I think oftentimes when men haven't figured out exactly how to express themselves in a masculine way, or they haven't learned how to show up in the world in a more masculine way, they will tend to challenge the person they're in a relationship with, because that's actually what they want. It's not good for a woman to be in a relationship where she's constantly being tested. That's not going to create a safe container for a woman. And typically that's either going to push a woman into her masculine, or it's going to shut her down, or both. Whereas for women, because for women they need safety, they need unconditional love. For the masculine, they need to be challenged with conditions. The feminine needs to feel safety without conditions. That's how a woman feels safe to open. But oftentimes as women, we feel like because we need that unconditional love and that unconditional safety, we spend so much time trying to create safety for a man in relationship and to prove to him we'll love him unconditionally. Like, oh, he can do anything to me and I'll still love him, which is why we see so many women that like allow themselves to be hurt in relationships because, and they hold this idea of standing by your man as a badge of honor because they realize that's how they want to be loved. When in reality, loving a man like that is not the best way to have a relationship. And that's where I think this whole like a man needs to love a woman more than a woman loves him comes from. Because at the end of the day, as a woman, we know if a man were to put conditions on his love for us, we would not feel that as love. We would feel that as very unsafe. So we feel like we need to love a man like that. And I think what we really should be thinking is like, no, we need to love a man in the best way for him. And the best way for a masculine partner to thrive and feel love is if we constantly make him show us how strong he is. And that's how we show our love for him, which for women would feel like not loving. But actually, it is loving to a masculine partner. Whereas a masculine partner constantly trying to test the feminine to get her to prove her love or to prove she's worthy of him, that is going to feel very unloving to the feminine. She's not going to view that as love. She's going to view that as hurt and pain. And the masculine is not going to get an open and receptive feminine being that he ultimately desires because she's going to be so guarded. So the masculine needs to love a feminine woman the way that she needs to be loved, the way that will bring out her feminine energy. The feminine needs to love a masculine man the way that will bring out his masculine energy. And it's counterintuitive to how we ourselves want to be loved. So I think by telling women that the man has to love you more, I think at the root of that, what that actually means is as women, we have to love him in a way that we would potentially find to be unloving. It's not necessarily that either person loves the other one less. It's that the way that we're expressing that is different. And I know I'm gonna get some arguments. I'm gonna get some men going, well, how do we vet women if we're not allowed to test them? For one thing, with presence. If you're a masculine man, you need to have presence. You need to be present, which means you're paying attention. And if you're with a woman that is just not aligning with the things that you need in your life, then she's not the woman for you. Like, that's how you vet a woman. And you can decide when the relationship needs to end. I'm not telling you to love a woman unconditionally to the point where she is abusive or mistreating you or even just not aligned with your vision for life. But at that stage, that's when the relationship may need to come to an end. Because if you as the masculine are actually tolerating abuse, then you would not be in your masculine energy, you would be in your wounded feminine energy. And let's face it, most men, if they think that a woman is not going anywhere and is gonna love them unconditionally, it's gonna make a man lazy. It's gonna make a man passive. If he thinks that he doesn't actually have to do anything in order for you to keep showing up in a relationship, most men are gonna get lazy, passive. Some may even get cruel and abusive, depending on whether or not that's in them. That's just the reality. And I know that a lot of men are like, so I'm never gonna get unconditional love. It's not necessarily true because many women will still love you unconditionally because the feminine is love. If you have a feminine woman, she's probably gonna love you unconditionally. There's a lot of women that love men, that truly love men who treat them really terribly. However, as a feminine woman, you need to have conditions on the relationship in order to keep you safe. You may love a man still who has mistreated you or cheated on you or something. It doesn't necessarily mean that the love stops. It probably won't. That said, the conditions on the relationship need to be readjusted or terminated. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily that the feminine is not going to love, because the feminine is love. So the feminine is probably going to love deeply. I mean, unless a woman has blockages, anybody can have blockages to love. That happens in life. That's just something that as humans we go through. However, when a woman connects to her feminine, she tends to be very open to love. So it's not that a man is not going to be loved unconditionally, but the relationship will need to have conditions. And most men are going to need that in order to step into their greatest self. It's one of the reasons why you see situations where when a woman is complaining about a problem and she just wants to vent, but the man is like, okay, I want to solve the problem. Why? Because men like to be problem solvers. Masculine men like to solve problems. Why? Because they like a challenge. They like to be challenged by something. They like to say, okay, there's a problem, let me fix it for you. That's what a masculine man wants to do. I gotta tell you, I've had this conversation with several exes, and it's actually, like, it never even occurred to me that this was what was going on in the past before I understood some of this masculine feminine stuff. But I've had several conversations with exes who would start like a fitness workout routine or something. Like, they'd start working out and they would say to me, like, man, when I really get in shape, you're really gonna love me now. My response was usually like, I'm not gonna love you more just because you get in shape. And I can't tell you how many times guys would respond with, oh, don't tell me that, that won't motivate me. Because they needed my motivation. They wanted to know that if they got fit and buff, that I was going to be more drawn to them. They wanted to know that if they achieved something, I was gonna celebrate it, right? Like, they wanted that condition, so to speak, as motivation. But I would always respond with like, I'm not gonna love you more if you get in shape. Because myself, and as for most women, if we were in a relationship where a man was going to love us more because we changed our body or altered our body, we would be heartbroken. And that's not to say that we don't want men to celebrate if we, you know, have a fitness achievement, or we don't want men to celebrate like if we get a hot new haircut that we really enjoy. But as women, if we're in a relationship that is conditional on us fitting a certain look, we're never gonna feel safe in that relationship, which is why I'm always so leery of men that insist that women have to stay a certain size or a certain look. No woman is ever gonna feel safe in a relationship if she feels like she cannot let her body change. As women, we shift and change. I mean, we all do, men and women, but women especially, we absolutely shift and change over time. Our bodies are meant to shift and change. We're not meant to look the same way at like 18 as we do at 60. We're just not meant to look, we're not meant to stay the same. And as women, like, even if we accept a relationship where there are conditions on our appearance to be in that relationship, we're never gonna fully feel safe in that relationship. So for me, like, I would never wanna be in a relationship with a man where, like, if I got really fit or something, if he was like, oh, I love you more now, like, that would break my heart. I would never want to be in that relationship. In fact, at times in my life when I have gotten myself to a certain societally acceptable body size, which I have other videos talking about, like my body journey and things like that, I'm not gonna get into that here, but at times when I have been in relationships where my body has been in that more societally acceptable size, it's always driven me crazy wondering, like, would this man want me if my body changed? And as a woman, you're never gonna fully open to that if you're in that situation. Whereas the fact that I had so many conversations with men who were like, oh, you're really gonna love me when I work out, as if they wanted to have that direct path to praise. They wanted to have that. They needed the condition. They were actually admitting that they needed the condition to motivate them. And I will admit, in my younger years, I wasn't giving that to them because I didn't understand it. Because in my mind, I would never want that to be a condition of my relationship. But as a man, they needed that. And I'm not saying that if a man hits a low point, that a woman shouldn't have compassion, understanding for situations. We all in life have highs and lows. So I'm not saying if a man happens to, you know, have some issues with his health, then he may, you know, not be as fit as he normally is. Or if a man is in a situation where, you know, he might have lost his job and he might be in a financial slump or something. I'm not saying that women should just like up and leave him and be like done with him, right? Most feminine women are not going to do that, because most feminine women, when they open their heart, they're going to attach. They're going to want to stay with that man. They're going to want to stand by his side. They're going to have that love and compassion, because most women, that's in us. A lot of us block that out, and there's a lot of women that have a lot of wounding around, you know, past hurts and traumas. So I'm not saying that women don't have a tendency to leave a man or don't have a tendency to bolt. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, but that's not as common in women. However, there is a point in time, and I've even heard men in, you know, groups that I've been in speaking about masculinity and things, where there's a lot of men who are like, yeah, I don't want a woman that's just gonna keep putting up with me falling deeper and deeper and deeper. Like initially, I'm gonna want her love and compassion. And I remember hearing a man say this one time. It was in like a men's circle that was talking about men and women in relationships and masculine energy. And he was actually like, yeah, I want a woman to be like, hey, remember who you are. Like I want my king back. You know what I mean? Like I want that man back. Like I want the woman that will call me out. For women, we don't really want that from men for the most part. Like we don't want men to be like, hey, step it up. Like you're not doing enough. That's not gonna feel loving to a feminine woman. To a masculine man, that's gonna feel loving. To a masculine man, that's gonna be like, hey, I know the kind of man you are and I want you to live up to that. That's more loving. To a man, to a woman, we wouldn't see that as loving. But to say to a man like, oh, I'm gonna love you no matter what. Like no matter how low you sink, I'm gonna be there for you. Like that, like ride or die chick thing, the ride or die chick typically dies, right? Like that's not what men need. Masculine men need women who are actually going to have conditions on the relationship. Whereas a feminine woman needs to know that she can open and it's gonna be safe. Like she needs to feel that safety. And I know there are gonna be some men who argue that's not fair, but at the end of the day, like what do you want as a result? Because as a man, if you keep testing a woman and putting conditions on your love for her, you're gonna get a shut down woman. Like you're not gonna get a fully open feminine woman. The more safety you can create in a relationship for your feminine partner, the more open and receptive she's going to be. And if you're a masculine man, having an open and receptive woman is gonna be what you want. Like that's how you create the sexual chemistry. There are gonna be men who are gonna argue, no, men just want peace in a relationship. We just want calm in a relationship. We don't want a woman who's challenging us all the time. The only men who are gonna have a problem with that are men that don't wanna step up to the challenge. And if you just want peace and calm in a relationship, then don't be in a relationship with a feminine woman, because a feminine woman is not peace and calm. A feminine woman has nothing to do with being little Miss Susie homemaker who just caters to your every need all the time. That's a maid. Hire a maid. If you want to hire a hooker and a maid, and well, don't hire a hooker, that's illegal. But I mean, if you want to hire a maid and a housekeeper or whatever and do all that and just have somebody that's just there for business purposes that you pay them for their service, that's fine. But if you want to be in a relationship with a feminine woman, you ain't gonna get peace. That's not how it works. And a truly masculine man is not in a relationship for peace. A truly masculine man is in a relationship for passion, sexual polarity. You can get peace and calm with a bunch of guys all hanging out, just zoning out, or, you know, do a meditation or something. But if you want a relationship where you have a masculine feminine polarity in a relationship, you're gonna need some friction. That's what masculine feminine dynamics is. If you want heat in a relationship, you need there to be some friction. And that's what the masculine and feminine are not the same. We're not the same things. We're not all the same. And the more that we try to treat each other like we're the same, the more we're gonna kill the sexual polarity in a relationship. There's also a false idea that gets thrown around, I think, in the manosphere about how like men love more. And I don't think that that's true at all. Men lust more. There's a false belief too about like, oh, men fall in love more, men know right away. Men know if they're attracted to a woman right away, for sure. But I think oftentimes, particularly in this manosphere, they confuse love and lust. They think, okay, I've lusted after this woman, I want to conquer this woman, I've chosen this woman. They mistake that for love, but it's not really love, it's lust. It takes men longer to love. They lust quicker, but it takes them longer to love, because most men are completely cut off from that feeling, from emotions, from feelings. They're cut off from that. So most men are not going to love immediately. They're going to lust immediately, which is why I really caution women when they see a man who is like determined that he's gonna be with her right away and is so sure right away that like she's the one. Oftentimes he's letting his lust for you cloud his sense of self. And I get into that a little bit in my Pretty Privilege video if you want to check that out. It's one of my more popular videos where I dive into that concept of like men who will just choose a woman who is their physical ideal and kind of ignore anything else about her, because men today are often conditioned to objectify women. That's not love, that's lust. It often takes men longer to actually love a woman, but they tend to lust quicker. It takes women longer to lust after a man or to see him in a more sexual way, because women tend to need more of an emotional connection first. So it takes a woman longer to necessarily like be able to fully open to a man sexually, but women often tend to fall in love quicker because women's hearts tend to be more connected to their sexual organs, so the love and the lust tends to need to come in tandem. I also find it kind of funny that, and I see this a lot in sort of like the manosphere space, where they're so quick to say that women are all about like feelings and emotions and men are all about facts and logic, as if the man's way is better. However, most of these men in the manosphere will talk about love as if it's a feeling and emotion and not like it's an actual action, like to love someone, which is ironic because that's actually contradictory to what they claim that men are about, which is that facts and logic. And the masculine is more about doing. It's about doing things, whereas the feminine is more about being, existing. It's just, that's just the difference between the masculine and the feminine. The masculine is about productivity, the feminine is about receptivity. So when I hear things, and I have another video where I've talked about this, I'm not gonna dive into this too much, but like the idea that men will say things like, well, as a man, you can cheat on the woman that you're with and you can still love her. Well, actually you can't. Because in reality, love is something, especially for the masculine, love is something that you do. Like, you show up for a woman in a loving way. So if you actively do something that you know is going to hurt your partner, you are not showing up in a loving way to her. So if you cheat on her and you know that is going to hurt her, and you are actively doing something that you know is going to hurt her, you cannot also love her at the same time, because you are not showing up in love for her. You are showing up in a way that's going to hurt her. And I find that just really ironic, because men can say things as if like, well, women are the emotional ones, or women are the one that are all about feelings and not facts. But yet those same men will turn around and say that love is a feeling and they can still feel it, even if they're doing something that is directly hurting their partner and is not showing up in love for your partner. I have a video where I talk about all the reasons why like men cannot cheat on their partner and still love her, and they cannot be a masculine partner showing up in a relationship if they are actively harming her, cheating on her, hurting her. Like, you can't do that. A masculine man is not going to show up that way in a relationship. A masculine man is going to show up in a way that is loving to his partner and not for his own selfish needs. I'm not going to dive into that too much in this video, but I just thought that was an interesting aside, is that I hear this a lot where they'll be like, oh, men love deeper or men love harder. They don't. Like, that's just not typically, and not in our current society. Men lust more in our society, but most men in our society, and I've mentioned this in other videos, I'm going to do a whole video about this topic, minimum, and this is a low estimate, 76% of men are addicted to porn, and porn conditions men to objectify women, which means most men are not even capable of actually feeling love for a woman. So the idea that men love a woman more is kind of ridiculous. However, there are a lot of men in very wounded feminine, which often is connected to feeling like you are the victim. So I think there's a lot of men in very wounded feminine that want to act as if they're so victimized by their feelings for a woman. Oftentimes wounded feminine will fall too hard too quickly for someone, become very dependent on another person. So a masculine man is not going to fall in love quickly. A masculine man may be very attracted to a woman. A masculine man may lust after a woman quite quickly. That's normal. A man in a healthy masculine energy is not going to be objectifying her. However, the masculine does not tend to love quickly. However, if a man is truly masculine, he will show up in a loving way towards humankind, right? He will show up in a way that is consistent with his being of showing up with, you know, honor, discipline, you know, respect, honesty, structure, focus, presence, those kind of things, because that's who he is. So a masculine man will show up that way regardless. However, the actual feeling of like opening your heart to love will come slower for a masculine man, because most men are not necessarily are taught to connect to their open heart as much. So it will tend to take men a little bit longer. If a man is like falling for you quick and falling for you hard, it's probably a lust thing. Not to say that the relationship cannot grow into something more, but as women, you have to be a little bit cautious of men that are like, oh, I love so quick, I love so fast, because typically that's somebody who is either in a wounded feminine or somebody who may be manipulating you, or somebody who may be clouding lust and love together. So I just want women to be aware of that. If a woman is loving too fast, that can often be a sign of wounded feminine as well. But typically the feminine will have more capacity for love. Ideally, you don't want to open to love too quickly with someone until you really know that this is a person who you can trust and a person who is creating safety. However, the feminine will naturally feel love and openness, compassion, those kind of things faster than the masculine will. So the idea that's going around like, oh, men love harder and this and that, and women never truly love a man. Women do. But again, for a woman to truly love a man, there needs to be conditions on the relationship. Not necessarily conditions on her love for you, but conditions on the relationship. So it's gonna look different. Whereas when a masculine loves a feminine, for her to feel love, there needs to be no conditions. And again, I want to reiterate that when I say that, I'm not saying that men should be putting up with abuse or mistreatment or anything. Men absolutely can have boundaries and should have boundaries in a relationship for sure. I'm not saying that if a woman goes out and cheats on a man or something like that, that he should just tolerate that or put up with that. But those are boundaries, and those boundaries can absolutely be part of the container of a relationship. And if the feminine decides to go outside of the container of the relationship, say be unfaithful or something, or cross a boundary with the masculine, he absolutely can say, okay, we may need to end this container, or, you know, have a conversation about, you know, what happened or something, depending on what it is, right? I would never tell anybody to stay with somebody, you know, if there was an abusive situation or if there was, you know, infidelity or something like that. And these things get very complicated, and there's all kinds of different examples and things like that that you can go into. But at the basis of it, if you want a relationship to work, you need a masculine partner and a feminine partner, and the masculine partner needs to have conditions. He needs to be challenged. The feminine partner needs to know that there is safety, and that comes with unconditional love. That's how it works. And I know some people are going to say it's not fair. That's the way relationships work. Men and women are not the same. I believe we're equally important, but we're not the same. Yeah, I hope that that clarified a few things for people, because I do think that that idea that like the man needs to love the woman more, I think can feel ultimately defeating for both men and women, when in reality it's not completely false, but it doesn't really give you the full story. So I hope that this breakdown of this actually made some of that a little bit more clear, maybe gave you a little bit more hope about relationships. It might not have, I don't know. If you have any thoughts on this topic or any other topics, suggestions you have for me, or questions or things you would like me to talk about, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up, and be sure you subscribe to my channel. I have online courses if you would like to check them out. Details in the description box below. I also have the Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal, which will help women connect to your dark feminine energy, which is amazing if you are a woman who has been in a dynamic of being like a people pleaser, or just letting men get away with everything, or like not feeling confident enough in yourself to actually like own your worth and to actually show up in a relationship in the best way that is challenging to a man. Dark feminine energy is something you really need to tap into if you were going to be in a relationship and love the masculine in a way that is going to challenge him to be his best self. If you want to check out the Dark Feminine Energy Guided Journal, it's available on Amazon. Details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts, including my new TikTok, which I'm trying to grow after my original account got banned. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.